Welcome all. The Department of Pharmacology, AIMS Bhubaneswar, is going to organize Professor J.K. Mohanty Memorial Oration in Clinical Pharmacology annually from this year onwards. Welcome Professor Krisanta Surya, Secretary of WHO Expert Committee in Selection and Use of Essential Medicine at Geneva. Welcome Professor Deepika Mohanty,
you are frozen, Dr.
J.K. Mohanty, who happens to be one of the most almighty, from all of us. So a request from Dr. Deepika Mohanty, this annual oration is started. Now I request Dr. Rituparna Mahiti, additional professor, to present a brief biography of Professor J.K. Mohanty. Over to Dr. Mahiti, please.
Mahiti.
Good evening all. It's indeed my proud privilege to present the biography and professional achievements and research works of Dr. J.K. Mohanty, who was an eminent pharmacologist and also a renowned physician from the state of Odisha. Dr. Jayakrishna Mohanty. Am I audible to you?
You are audible. Can I request all the participants to please mute your mics? Yes, go ahead. I think go ahead.
Dr. J.K. Mohanty was born on 1st October 1909 at Balipadia in Kotak district. He passed his medical school examination from Odisha Medical School with gold medal and another 9 silver medals in different subjects. He was awarded LNP diploma in 1936. As we all know, in 1930s, the medical schooling system was completely different. And that time, the LNP diploma was the license to practice medicine in India. After passing the medical school, Dr. Mohanty began his professional career as a medical officer under Government of Odisha, and he served different places of the state, including very interior parts of Koraput district. At that time, most of his patients were very poor and illiterate. And the most important hurdle that time he faced, that in that pre-independence era, that most of the patients were a bit suspicious about the Western medicine. He often had to win them over to accept him as their well-wisher to bring about wellness in their lives. We know that SCB Medical College was established in 1944, and after that, he completed a condensed MBBS course for 2 years from 1946 to 1948 from SCB Medical College. Soon after that, he was appointed as demonstrator in the Department of Pharmacology in the same year, and thereafter he was promoted to assistant professor and physician in charge of therapeutic ward of the teaching hospital. In 1952, he was awarded the Commonwealth Fellowship under Colombo Plan, and immediately he joined the University of New Zealand. He completed his MD degree in Pharmacology and Therapeutics from the University of New Zealand, Dunedin in 1954. These are some of the photographs of Dr. Mohanty with his professors and colleagues at Dunedin, New Zealand. As his brilliant track record in academics and research, the university requested Dr. Mohanty to join the Faculty of Medicine, and he joined Otago University Medical School at New Zealand as Associate Professor in 1954. But after a few months, he decided to return to India and rejoined his post in Department of Pharmacology at SCB Medical College, Cuttack. And after 4 years, he was promoted to professor post. In 1960, he was transferred to VSS Medical College at Bulla. He was ex officio head of the School of Pharmacy from 1962 to 1968. And he retired from VSS Medical College, Bulla in 1968. Post-retirement, he was mainly busy providing free medical services to the poor and the indigent. Right from the beginning of his professional medical career in the 1930s, he developed a passionate interest in clinical and laboratory investigations and research. He contributed more than 50 research papers to various Indian and international medical journals like Nature, Antiseptic, British Journal of Pharmacology, Journal of Pharmacy and Pharmacology of London, Indian Medical Gazette, Journal of the Indian Medical Association, etc. It is a matter of pride that he was the first medical scientist from Odisha whose research findings have been referred in various medical texts and reference books, and whose findings such as sperm test of pregnancy, a new method of assay of gonadotropins, were practiced not only in India, but in other parts of the world also. Among his works, the first one, the studies on sex hormones, sperm test of pregnancy utilizing male toad Bufo melanostictus, it was published in Indian Medical Gazette in 1950, and later it was referenced in textbook of J.P. Modi's Medical Jurisprudence and Toxicology and Physiology of Sex and Reproduction, published by Edinburgh University. Another path-breaking publication, a new method of assay of human chorionic gonadotropin utilizing male toad Bufo melanostictus, was published in the Journal of Pharmacy and Pharmacology in 1951. His work on development of tolerance to ganglion blockade by methonium compounds was published in Nature in 1954. In continuation of that work, he also published another work titled The Development of Tolerance and Cross-Tolerance to Methonium Compounds in Laboratory Animals, and it was published in British Journal of Pharmacology in 1955. Later, it was cited by Sir F.A. Smith in his book High Arterial Pressure, published by Blackwell's Scientific Publishers. During 1945, when he was working in Government Headquarters Hospital, Koraput, he published some very interesting case report and case series in the Indian Medical Gazette. Mepacrine intoxication and vitamin B deficiency and maternal blood in whooping cough are two very important case series published in the Indian Medical Gazette in 1945. The presence of rhinoscleroma in Korakput district of southern Odisha and the occurrence of leptospirosis in Odisha was two very important case report also published in the same year in 1945 in the Indian Medical Gazette. Another publication, Atibrin brand of amyl acridine derivative in human malaria, was published in Antiseptic in 1945 and it faced him a very prestigious Winthrop Award. His contribution, mainly related to ganglionic transmission, was cited in the published book like Pharmacology of Ganglionic Transmission, which was edited by Dmitry A. Karvachev. Not only medical sciences, his contribution to Oriya literature also worth mentioning. He pioneered and prepared the English Oriya medical terminology entitled Ayurvigyan Paribhasha Abhidhana. He made his mark in the field of Oriya literature and wrote poems, novels, essays, and plays. He is the author of several books like Boitojatri, which is a novel for children, Sisuro Bikas, it is a collection of essays, Pratidhani Ravdhani, it is a collection of poems, Sagar Sangam, it is a novel, Rajasundari, it is a play, Sagarika O Ananda Galpo, it is a collection of short stories, and Bishesh Pathya, it is a book on nutrition. His book Boitojatri earned him a prestigious prizes on children's literature, both from Government of India and Government of Odisha. The English translation of this book titled Three Mariners was published in 1993. He left us on December 5th, 1994. His immortal works are with us. His blessings are always with us. And this oration is a tribute from our side to a great legend, Professor J.K. Mohanty. Thank you all. Now, I request our Honorable Director, Professor Gitanjali Padmanabhan, to introduce our esteemed speaker, Professor Krisanta Veerasurya, to our audience. Madam, please unmute your mic.
Thank you, Dr. Rituparna. Before I introduce Professor Krisanta Veerasurya, I would like to place on record our sincere thanks and appreciation to Professor Mohanty for having given us this opportunity to host this oration in honor of Dr. J.K. Mohanty. Thank you, ma'am. And I think his life and his works are something which all the young pharmacologists, and not only young pharmacologists, but all the physicians of Odisha should know and try to emulate. Thank you, ma'am. As a daughter, I think you have done a wonderful gesture in initiating this lecture. And I am indeed privileged to have the honor of introducing Professor Krisanta Veerasurya, who will be the first orator for this lecture series, which we hope will be an annual event of AIIMS Bhubaneswar. Professor Krisanta Veerasurya is an MD from Ceylon, FRCP from United Kingdom, and a PhD from London. He is a Sri Lankan physician and a clinical pharmacologist who began his training in a medical school in his country and completed postgraduate degrees in the United Kingdom in the 1980s. His subsequent education, which he claims is still continuing, and I believe that, on medicine's use, was in Sri Lanka and other countries he worked in. His experience in encouraging, shepherding, cajoling, implementing, and finally monitoring better medicine's use has been at a national level in Sri Lanka, at a regional level in the Southeast Asian region of the World Health Organization, and at a global level at the World Health Organization headquarters in Geneva. It has been through the roles of a physician, an educator as a professor and a university academic. It has been done as a medicines regulator in the Ministry of Health, Sri Lanka, As a regional advisor in the World Health Organization, Southeast Asia Regional Office of New Delhi, and finally, as the secretary of the WHO Expert Committee on Selection and Use of Essential Medicines, Geneva. He retired from the World Health Organization in 2014. This professional journey of his also involved side visits to NGOs, civil society organizations, intellectual property issues, medicines pricing, health technology assessments, and monitoring of clinical trials in the international arena. After retirement, he continues to work in academia, medicines issues, especially in regulation, and healthcare financing, mainly in middle and lower income countries. He is a veteran of the pharma war zone and has so far survived with the same ethical, scientific, and regulatory principles that he had from the very beginning. Despite the scars, there is a fond belief, eternal hope, and optimistic outlook that medicines will finally become primarily for health and then for profit, and the potential of essential medicines will be realized for low and middle income countries within the universal health care in his lifetime. I also would like to say that I first met Professor Veerasurya in a meeting organized by Dr. Vasantha Muthusamy. So I was so happy when I saw Professor Vasantha Muthusamy, who is also here to listen to Chris today. Over to you, Chris. Unmute yourself, please.
Thank you very much for the very high presentation of my not very great capabilities, but nevertheless, listening to the introduction of Professor Mohanty, I was very pleased to see that Professor Mohanty had two strains on his two paths on his life. One was pharmacology, but the second was on bringing the benefits of pharmacology, right? On bringing the benefits of pharmacology to the people of Orissa and India. So therefore, I mean, it is great pleasure to me that I will talk about how we can improve prescribing and therefore the benefits of the medicines. So to begin,
Chris, just one moment, please. Sir. I'm just interrupting. My IT people, can you mute one Dr. Devjani Das? Because she's not muted. My IT cell, can you mute her, please? Dr. Devjani Das, please mute yourself. Okay. Okay, right.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay. So as I said, my presentation is on improving prescribing, the ethical basis, lessons and tools in the journey. What we have here is not a technical presentation, and it is something which looks at what the journey is on bringing the benefits of medicine to the people that you serve. And as you will see from the presentation, it's more a look at a particular personal viewpoint of a prescriber. So to begin, firstly, a declaration of interest. And it is important that this declaration of interest is made at the beginning of the presentation. I have got, hold on, please. I am unable to get this annotation out. I wonder whether somebody can help me. Oh, okay. Well, it will have to be there, I think.
Chris, you're having a writing tool in your...
Yeah, that's what I was trying to basically get rid of this red.
Yeah, okay, I think you've done it. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So here is my declaration of interest. And as you can see, it's a very short declaration of interest. And it is important in this particular situation and in general that declarations of interest are made before any presentation. I will come to that later. What then is the basis of this presentation? It is clearly about improving prescribing, but this is not entirely a technical exercise. It is more than a technical exercise. It is not a lecture that is given in medical school which says, these are the factors you need to take into account. It is more than that. First, I will look at the wider view of the responsibility of the medical profession towards the patient and the ethics that are involved. Then I will, after discussing that, ask what are the tools that are available for improving prescribing that any prescriber can access and use. Thirdly, what are the lessons that we have learned and continue to learn in improving prescribing? And that is particularly important because this is not a journey with an end, but it is a continuing journey which will show us where we have this objective in the distance, but we have to continue. The second, the important point of this is the focus is on personal improvement and motivation rather than being prompted by others or through the system on how to improve your prescribing. And finally, as all of you know, prescribing can never be perfect, but can and should continue to be improved. It is one exercise that continues throughout your professional life to improve and to see that you do better and better. Now, to go back to that declaration of interest that I made, all of you are familiar with the public disclosure in the journals of what the declarations of interest are. You look at the bottom of it and they will look at the author and the author says, this is the, I have no this conflict of interest, or the author will say, I received grant funding and so on. Yes, that should be there in journals, but it should also be there in any presentation that you make. For example, if I were to come and talk to you about a new drug and how it is going to be better than what is existing, then in that case, I must declare whether I have any connection with the new drug, its investigation, and with the pharmaceutical company. And as I said, it prevents hidden interests and imposes a transparency so that it is fine, so that people know what the situation is. And it is a part of the ethics of a profession. I mean, it is not only for medicine, for lawyers, engineers. Well, if engineers give a report and recommend a particular material, they should declare whether they had any connection with the company that makes this material. And a declaration of interest allows the audience to make their own judgment. That is, if the audience looks at it and says, yes, we know he investigated the drug, but we can judge for ourselves whether he is being fair or not. And finally, it's simply a question of being honest and straightforward with the audience. Now, to go on to prescribing. Most of you would have prescribed today. It is one of the commonest day-to-day activity professional activity of a doctor and has strong ethical, commercial, and social dimensions. We rarely think of these when we do this. But it is important that we remember this. And it has a great relevance to our part of the world, our developing world, the low and middle income countries, because of a very important reason. For those of you who are not familiar with the developed, the high income countries, healthcare systems there have a system of where the patient simply has to pay a prescription fee or something that is a token which is covered by the healthcare system, health insurance. So if an expensive drug is prescribed, then in that case, the patient doesn't have to pay for the expensive drug. It is covered by the health insurance. Even if a cheap drug is prescribed, he just pays only the cost of the prescription fee. So as a result of this, the patients in the high-income developed countries do not feel the financial pressure. But as all of you know, in our part of the world, it is what we call the out-of-pocket expenses. Think of a 45-year-old man who's come with his father to get some medicine. And it is quite expensive. And from the limited budget that this man has, he will treat his father. But it could be at the expense of something that is basic for his children. It could be food for the day or something. So this is why it is important that we consider, especially in our part of the world, what we call the out-of-pocket expenses and think where we should do this in a situation of affordable medicines. Then prescribing is almost done as a reflex activity. In fact, some of them have said that this is actually a kind of spinal reflex, whereas actually it should be much higher up rather than that. You just hear what the patient says and then write the prescription. That is not, well, I mean, at times this is what is done, but should always remember that there is something that needs to be looked at. In the majority of the prescribers, it is a habit, but like all habits, one that needs to be reviewed. Prescribing can and should be improved with a conscious effort, making sure that you do this because you've got to think of what you do routinely, not fall into the routine, and to do better. The predominant requirement, as I said at the beginning, is a personal effort and responsibility. Now to go on to doctors. Doctors are professionals, just like lawyers, just like engineers and so on. But how do they differ from skilled workers who are mechanics and drivers and the businessmen traders like pharmaceutical industry and shopkeepers? There is a very clear distinction here. Doctors, professionals, not only doctors, all professionals receive a fee for their services from the patient. They do not profit from selling goods. Unlike the traders, unlike the businessmen, they do not profit from selling goods. So therefore, if a doctor were to profit from selling medicines, that is inappropriate. Doctors are paid a fee because the patient believes that they are doing the best for the patient, and therefore the fee is what is given to do the best for the patient, in the best interest of the patient. This is known as the fiduciary responsibility, which is based on trust and confidence. And because of this, society allows the professions to define the standards and codes of conduct, which is the level of care and behavior that has to be followed. And this is why it says that you must act in the best interest of the patient. and not keeping to these standards should result in a disciplinary action. Professions have special privileges and in turn have special responsibilities, including disciplinary actions. Sadly and unfortunately, doctors do not adhere to these standards, and there are no punishments in our part of the world, in low and middle income countries. How many doctors have you heard of being disciplined by the medical council? Whereas if you go to the United Kingdom, you would see that the General Medical Council has repeated reports of doctors are doing unprofessional things and being suspended being practice and being sent for re-education. So in that sense, the system protection, unfortunately, does not exist in our part of the world. To go on to prescribing and ethics, the doctor's professional obligation, and the only obligation, is to their patient, towards the well-being of the patient. If a doctor gets a certain amount of money from referring patients to a particular laboratory for investigations, that is clearly unethical. If a doctor gets money in return for referring to a specialist, that is clearly unethical. Remember, the basis of this is a fiduciary relationship. The doctor refers the patient to the best consultant available because he thinks the patient will get the best treatment and not for any other considerations. Now, why is this particular aspect important? If in a normal commercial transaction, if you go to buy a trouser or a shirt or a sari or a skirt, you who are buying it will make the decision as to what you will purchase and also pay for that purchase. So in that sense, the one who decides is the one who pays. In a prescription, the one who decides, who is the doctor, does not pay. It is the patient who pays. And therefore it is important, and not only important, it is the primary obligation to consider the interest of the patient when we write a prescription. And so now, hopefully you would have thought something about the prescriptions and the ethics. We come on to the practical aspects of prescribing. Doctors may say, well, in this particular situation, what does this exactly mean in terms of what drugs we have to prescribe? What is the information that we require? Well, you may think, look, we need to know about drugs, and there is quite a lot of drugs that we need to know. How do we manage this? How do we handle this? And that is the question. How many drugs does a doctor need to know? And studies have clearly shown, although there are very many drugs available, that a doctor and even a specialist prescribes around 50 drugs routinely and not very much more. So it is that 50 that the prescriber should become familiar with. Then the information at the fingertip is for this 50 at present. And outside this 50, if you go outside this, if you are thinking that I must prescribe, that I need to prescribe an unfamiliar drug, it would be particularly important to refer to these other sources of medicines information. Previously, if you sort of said, look, you should be very familiar with this information, now you must remember this. And the answer from the prescriber would be, yes, probably it's in a book, it's in a formulary, and sometimes the formulary is not available. Sometimes I do not know where it is. How do I get this information easily? A very valid point. And these formularies may not, I may have to buy on my own and may not be available. Well, there is a solution now, and I think most of you would be using it, that there is drug information available on your smartphone applications. And this is the one that has brought forward our drug information to our fingertips. And the one that I use, which I will present here, and you may have others, but you can judge the appropriateness of this as I go along, is the British National Formulary. And the British National Formulary has been there from the 1980s, and we know clearly is one official source of information that provides unbiased, approved information, and is probably one of the most, it is clearly one of the most authoritative medicines information sources. I would actually think of it as the gold standard of this situation. Well, if you then want to prescribe, what is the framework of prescribing that you have? And here, the rational use of drugs given in 1985, and I think that some of you would probably have not been prescribers when this was described. And it says the rational use of drugs requires that patients receive their medications appropriate to their clinical needs, in doses that meet their own individual requirements, adequate period of time, lowest cost to them and their community. It's a fairly good statement, clear statement of what it has. What does this practically mean? We must have the correct drug with the generic name. And as a clinical pharmacologist, I must tell you, if you do prescribe by brand name, that I do not think is appropriate. Just think, ofloxacin, ciprofloxacin. Those are generic names. They give you an idea what it is, that they are in the same group. But if you write their brand names, is there any connection? For doctors to use brand names is to give up the scientific basis of their prescribing and to think in commercial terms. Well, if you do want a particular brand, that would be appropriate. That is your choice. But you should write the generic name first and then put in the brand name after that. You must know whether it is an appropriate indication. For example, you cannot use the ciprofloxacin. Would have to be careful with children because of problems in bone formation. You'd have to be the appropriate drug considering efficacy, safety, suitability for patient, and cost. Appropriate dosage, administration, duration. There should be no contraindications, and there should be correct dispensing, including appropriate information for patients. And patient adherence to treatment should be encouraged, and I would say, from listening to the description of Dr. Mohanty, he seems to have been one of the best patient educators that was there in the 1950s and 1960s, long before we thought of patient education. Now, getting the correct drug information, and this is what I do, and here is a very quick example. Now, what we have here is the screen of a smartphone. Then in that, you can see that the BNF is there, the British National Formulary. It is there for the adult as well as the children. The next one is, you might be able to see, when it is clicked, this is what is given in the smartphone application. And it asks you, what type of drug do you want to look at? And here, in this situation, you have clicked H, and therefore you have all the, you can either choose the drug, but I'm just giving you an example, and all the drugs that are there in the situation are shown. And in this particular situation, I'm looking at hydrochlorothiazide. This would not take more than 2 seconds. And the next one shows the information for hydrochlorothiazide. It gives you the indication and dose, important safety indication, contraindications, The full list of it is there. Clicked on the side effects, and this is what you get, all very clearly. Well, if you have a patient who has an anemia and an infection, and you suspect something, it could be a rare situation, yes, hydrochlorothiazide does cause agranulocytosis. This information is available to you at your fingertip. Now, as I have told you, this I consider is one of the best practical drug information sources that are available. And there are maybe others that you use, fine. But the question is that you must use these at your fingertips so that you get the best information that is available for your patient. An important part of this is that this application can be used offline, and in many countries, people are scared of data charges. So once this is downloaded, there is no need for you to worry about the data charges. The Department of Pharmacology in AIIMS Bhubaneswara has instructions on installing the BNF app. And there is a small page PDF file which you could get it from them if you are interested in installing it. However, I have given you the BNF app as an example, and there will be other apps that may be suitable. The most important thing to remember is to check that the drug information is independent and unbiased. Commercial sources of drug information are not to be trusted. Now we come on to this question of, look, we got this information, but today I have to look at a rare drug maybe called capecitabine, and then maybe I need to get detailed drug information. But here I will give you an example again to relate. It's a common drug, but you are looking at what you would call the detailed medicines information. And in that, it's a summary of product characteristics that I talk about, the SPC. And you will see very clearly here, I've just taken a common example so that it can make it is easier. And you can see a description of furosemide, commonly the brand common name is Lasix, and it gives all the situations that it can be used. The indications, the therapeutic indications are given. This is a summary of product characteristics that was got from this website. And clearly there are two indications that are there: treatment of edema associated with congestive heart failure and the treatment of peripheral edema due to mild and moderate hypertension. Now, this is just the first part of the SPC that I show you. This is actually generally about 20 pages giving you very detailed information. And what is the detailed information? I consider it a kind of a birth certificate of the product. Gives you every detail that is there and should be issued with each medicine registered by a medicines regulatory authority. It's an open access public document. And it is a core of the medicines registration system, and it is something that will help to improve prescribing. It is seen in the European Medicines Agency, US FDA, and so on. And now, the SPC is the total framework for the medicine that you have looked at. For example, if you were to use furosemide for premenstrual edema, no, that is not an indication that is allowed, because if you remember, there were only two indications that were there, and that you are using a drug for an unapproved indication. And it's very simple to get an SPC if you want. Just simply search for it by a generic name and the term SPC, and there will be a large amount of SPCs which are all very similar, which can be downloaded. One of the disadvantages is an SPC does not provide comparative medicines information. Is one better than the other? That is not provided. Unfortunately, due to the decentralized system, in drug registration in India, there is no SPC equivalent in the Indian drug registration system. So in that sense, if you do want to get a lot of information, the complete information on a medicine, you do have to depend on an SPC of another regulatory authority. So to finish this section on medicines information, detailed medicines information is available. There is no excuse for saying, I did not know that you cannot use that drug in that situation. I did not know that was a side effect and I continued the drug and the patient became even worse because the side effect became worse. Well, the question is, this type of drug information is provided free in the developed high-income countries. The BNF app is provided free to all prescribers in the NHS. But unfortunately, the equivalent of that, in our part of the world, there is no such provision of information by our healthcare systems. And therefore, it is the personal and professional responsibility of the doctor to get the correct information. You may say that, no, we will wait for the system to provide. The system certainly isn't going to provide. And if you are an ethical professional doctor, you will search and get the information that is there. As I have repeatedly stressed, getting the correct medicines information is a personal effect of the prescriber in our part of the world. It's a personal journey. Very few examples of healthcare systems in our low and middle income countries and in the developing world that routinely provide this information. Now, I will just go a little bit sideways and ask you to think, where do you think doctors get their drug information? I have given you a list here: medical journals, clinical meetings, you see the list there, junior colleagues even, and all of that. What do you think are the important ones that provide these? Would you, in your mind, rank them in the order of priority? Prescribers think of senior colleagues as the #1 priority? Or would it be formularies? Well, repeated studies have shown that where doctors get their drug information is actually sadly from medical representatives and drug advertisements. Then senior colleagues, maybe even junior colleagues, may be okay, but not as reliable as independent drug information. Maybe from medical journals and clinical meetings. Finally, maybe from formularies or drug information bulletins. And it is actually the last two which should be at the very beginning of this list. Sadly, does this indicate good information practices for prescribing? No, and it will be, in that particular situation, demonstrate why, to some extent, prescribing needs to be improved and is of rather poor quality in our part of the world. Now, after having told you this, I'll ask you just very quickly to think about this. A few quick checks on prescribing, a self-evaluation. What was the last non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug you prescribed for a child? Clearly, for simple fever, just simple fever. Was it paracetamol or ibuprofen? Or was it naproxen, diclofenac, or any of these? If you have prescribed anything other than paracetamol and ibuprofen, that is not the correct drug to prescribe. Because again and again, it has been shown that other non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs produce unwanted effects in children and are not suitable for them. Yes, you may want to check. If you do look at the BMF for children, you will see that in that particular situation, yes, naproxen and diclofenac are prescribed for children, but for very specific indications such as juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. So therefore, it is very important to remember that these are very specialized drugs that should be used for specific instances, and they should not be used in simple fever. A quick check to see how many children have been prescribed these non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Now, it would also be interesting to see if naproxen was prescribed, what was the information that was given to make that prescriber make the decision on naproxen? Which of the sources gave it in the previous slide? And so therefore, it is useful to examine the reasons for prescribing any medicine other than paracetamol or ibuprofen in the above situation. These are checks that you should go through in your mind when you look at this question of improving prescribing. Now, the next one, when was the last prescription for vitamin E? What did you prescribe it for? Was it body aches? Was it marginal patient anorexia? Well, the only indication for vitamin E is severe malabsorption. But as most of you would know, this is widely prescribed. Why? Well, what was the source of information to prescribe this? And it would be useful again to check. I asked, why was it prescribed from some of the pharmacies? And if there are pharmacists listening in on this, they will see that it has just been prescribed as a nutritional supplement. Our normal diet gives sufficient vitamin E, and there is actually no necessity for extra vitamin E. So just if you are interested, check with the pharmacy to see how much of it has been prescribed. So here are some simple questions to ask yourself before prescribing. Do I know the generic name of the drug? And as I mentioned earlier, the importance of the generic name, because that gives you what the drug is, what group it is, and you therefore know the contraindications, adverse effects, and other things that are there. Secondly, is this indication that I am using to prescribe this drug, did I get it from reliable drug information, or was it from drug advertisements that was found? Thirdly, do I know the contraindications and the common side effects of the drug? Fourth, do I know alternative drugs, what their alternatives are available, and why did I choose this? This is a sort of situation where you are being critical and trying to improve your prescribing. And then we do want a list of safe, effective, affordable medicines what a prescriber can choose from. Well, the WHO Model Essential List is there. The National List of Essential Medicines is there. Might be worthwhile to think in terms of, if you were prescribing, what is the similar equivalent medicine that is on these lists? And these medicines are usually generic and extremely affordable. And compare, as I said, what you prescribe with what is in the list. Well, here is a website if you would like to see the essential medicines list and then compare your prescribing. Now, we get on to another aspect that I mentioned, drug advertisements and medical representatives. Are drug advertisements and visits from medical representatives useful for your prescribing? Well, I can give you an example. 20% of the prescribers in the UK simply do not see medical representatives. They say the information they provide is not good enough, is biased. I do not want to see medical representatives. How many doctors do you think there are among your colleagues who do not see medical representatives? And these same NHS doctors simply throw away the drug advertisements that come in unread. Well, when you go into a clinic, you see all of this. And at times you wonder, what does this mean? Is the patient there as the number one, or is this also an opportunity for the drug industry to do things within the clinic? This is appropriate, and that is what is important. In you all are in the departments of pharmacology. And when I was in the Department of Pharmacology, and it continues in Colombo, we made sure that our department did not have any drug advertisements. We did not ballpoint, we did not use prescription pads in our department to serve as an example that we do not take advertisements or are influenced by. While for you to put in your department, okay, and this is a point that I will come to later, but again, that these are not provide any useful education.
Please just hold on one moment. Please hold on.
Which are in the
Chris, can you just hold on one moment? I need to ask someone to stop talking. I'm not able to find out who is. Okay, right. Please, I have muted that person. Please carry on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, in well-regulated healthcare systems, all gifts must be declared in a public database, even educational support. I will give you an example of that later. And in our part of the world, are gifts monitored? Do you know who got what? I mean, there are enough stories on that, and I do not want to go into that, but there are stories of prescribers being given natural amounts of gifts to influence their prescribing because of a very clear possibility of improperly influencing prescribing. Have a look at, as I have mentioned, if you really do want to do a quality check in your clinic, look at the amount of advertisements, calendars, ballpoints that are there. Are they there for helping the doctors, or are they there for advertising? So far, I have talked about the individual. What you must do, get your drug information. Think of yourself when prescribing. But I'm now going to turn to the system and ask you, what is the system? How does the healthcare system influence your prescribing? And there are basically two groups there: the public non-profit and the private for-profit healthcare systems in the countries. And in the high-income countries, although most of them are public non-profit, they are heavily regulated and very cost-sensitive. Whereas in our part of the world, low and middle-income countries, they are unfortunately private for-profit, and it is the vast majority unregulated and no focused on cost. Well, how does this difference affect prescribing? And if you look at prescribing in countries, in high-income countries, the prescribing is much, much better than in low and middle-income countries. It is not a question of the medicines not being there. It is the drugs that are used are correct and for the prescribed indications. Whereas when we look at low and middle-income countries, multiple antibiotics, enormous waste of drugs, and what do we have in that situation? So the question is it the prescribers that are better in high-income countries, or is it the system that is better in high-income countries? And my answer to that is, It is not the prescribers who are better. It is simply the system is better. What does the system? The system has governance of prescribing. Again, to give you an example, because I'm familiar with it, the British National Formulary. If somebody in the healthcare system in UK prescribes according to the British National Formulary, there is no problem. But if they prescribe outside the formulary, there will be questions. It is not to say that they cannot, but they will be asked to justify. So that is what you call governance of prescribing. So therefore, that prescribing is monitored and people are asked to prescribe according to routine treatment. Do we have that in our part of the world? Well, in that sense, that governance regulates the role of the profit-making private sector in healthcare is very heavily regulated with a focus on cost containment. Governance of prescribing is unregulated in our low and middle income countries, which are mainly for-profit systems, and the focus is not on cost and value for money for the patient. So therefore, the balance between public health objective society and commerce is very different in high-income versus low-income countries. In high-income countries, it is the public health objectives that have a much greater focus than commerce, and it has vice versa in the low and middle income countries and has a very huge impact on prescribing. Quickly, to give you an example, this is from the treatment of diarrhea in private and public sector from a low and middle income country. Have a look at this and you can see there are 4 things that are there. In blue is the public sector. If you look at it, in blue is the private sector. And in purple is the public sector. First, ORS, that is the correct treatment given for the vast majority of the patients, but not given in the private sector. Why? This is simply because ORS is a very low value item and there is not very much money to be made by prescribing ORS. Look at antibiotic use. Again, high prescription in the private sector, lesser prescription in the public sector. Again, antibiotics are in that particular situation the one that can give you a bigger return. Look at antidiarrheal use. In this particular situation, the antidiarrheal use is used enormously. You may think, well, you may need to use antidiarrheals in adults. Remember, this is a survey on children. Antidiarrheals are not to be used in children because it could lead to dangerous hidden dehydration. So antidiarrheal, highly given in the private sector, more money, whereas in the public sector, very little of it was given. And you can see from that clearly the treatment, the standard treatment guideline compliance was much higher in the public sector than in the private sector. So therefore, this is a very good example of financial incentives in the private sector in low and middle income countries. Now again, looking at the system, we previously talked about the individual. Again, looking at the system. Comparison of prescribing in countries. What are the systems in place? Well, as pharmacologists, as clinical pharmacologists, you would know there are drugs and therapeutics committees, there are drug audits, there are treatment guidelines, there is feedback by the pharmacy in high-income countries. Are these paper tigers or effective systems? Well, if you look at them, individual prescribers in high-income countries can be disciplined. There have been situations where prescribers in their intern year have not done correctly have been asked to extend their internship. Hospitals have been asked to explain why they have gone over their drug budget after it has been shown by drug audits. I was participating on a workshop antimicrobial resistance, and the pharmacists there were able to say what antibiotics were used in these particular wards and compare one against the other. Not only that, they were able to see what were the narrow spectrum antibiotics that were being used and what were the broad spectrum antibiotics being used. And the wards that used the narrow spectrum antibiotics after making a diagnosis were the ones that were doing it correctly. All this can be said, but there is also discipline. Hospitals have been penalized for exceeding their drug budget. Hospitals have been penalized for irrational drug use. So all of these tools are not paper tigers, but are effective systems to see that prescribing is appropriate and correct. That is what is there in high-income countries. Some of these tools may exist in our low and middle-income countries, but are they effective or are they paper tigers? Have you heard of any prescriber being disciplined for inappropriate drug use? A ward that has used, if you had compared Ward 3 versus Ward 4, there was a big difference in drug expenditure despite them being general medical wards. Have they been questioned about why there is such a big difference in medicines expenditure, the medicines budget? Is it the lack of resources? I suspect not. Our countries have actually got very good system resources, and they can identify who is prescribing what. I suspect it is the motivation and the will does not exist in the healthcare system in low and middle income countries, this being partly due to us being subservient to the clinicians who are at the moment totally independent of guidelines and being told to prescribe appropriately. A small sidetrack to tell you, and this would be amusing to you, you will see this is an example of a system that has been produced in the United States. This shows what was given to a particular doctor by the pharmaceutical companies. Those of you with sharp eyes will see that it is to a Dr. B.D. Mohanty, which is at the bottom of this thing. I just picked this up from the website. You can see the website down below. Clearly, all of this is transparent. Why is this done? Why are doctors agreeing to this? Simply because of the regulation. Doctors have been told, if you are going to have patients in the government health system, you have to agree to this transparency. Companies have been told, you have to agree to provide this information. Well, all I can tell you from Odisha, it would be possible to see what doctors are paid by the pharmaceutical companies in Florida, USA. By the way, when I looked at the website that you see at the bottom there were 23 doctors with the name of Mohanty, and this is just one simple name that I have picked out. Would be amusing for you to see how many and what they get. Is it possible for us to see from Odisha itself what prescribers in Bhubaneswar have been paid? Not at all, because there is no system in place to see this being done. Now, so the situation that prescribers in our part of the world is faced with is that he or she is a prescriber with the tools, but not the system in place. This is what we have in our part of the world. It is very easy for you now to access good drug information. It would be done and you would be able to prescribe correctly. But there is no, and getting the drug information is your personal journey, personal effort. But what is a little bit dispiriting is the system is unlikely to reward you for good practice, good prescribing. Have you heard of prescribers who were then in that case who were told, yes, you have been spending, you have been using drugs appropriately and been given, if not a medal, at least a commendation for proper prescribing? Rarely do we see any activity like that. So therefore, we have to depend on ourselves, our internal motivation, personal decision and motivation, and it is something that has to be continuously sustained. The question I see is, are you a professional with ethics and primary obligations to the patient, or a free agent with obligations to the patient and many other additional obligations, including to yourself? The first has only one obligation. The second has many obligations and is against our ethics and professionalism. So again and again, I make this point. The focus in this presentation has been on personal improvement and motivation rather than the system. I could have made the alternative presentation of showing you all the tools, how they were used, the drug audits, breakdown, the IT systems, and how they have used improved prescribing. But the examples would have been from high-income countries, developed world. And they would have remained theoretical to you. You would have seen them as good systems, but nothing that could do at the point of care, point of prescribing, that will help you. And this is what my persistent message has been. And in that sense, what Dr. Mohanty also did when he went and served the patients for free and educated them. The focus has been on personal improvement and motivation rather than the system. So to conclude, just a moment, please. The We are rich enough to afford all the drugs. We don't have an essential medicines list. So then I tell them, if it was in the UK, so that means you allow all the 12 benzodiazepines that are available to be prescribed by the hospital? Oh, no. We don't allow them to prescribe all 12. We just allow them to prescribe only 3. Oh, I see. So how did you decide on these 3? Well, they were the most cost-effective and safe drugs. Oh, I see. And what about your antihypertensives? And they will then say, you give all the ACE inhibitors? No. Again, a very selected list. So then I ask them, what is the basis of your list? Well, the basis of our list is basically we have selected these drugs because they are required and they are cost effective. And then finally I ask them, how much do you have in your list? Well, about 350. the essential medicines list has about 340. So that is the great hypocrisy that exists in that sense, that the high-income countries use the principle to the maximum extent. And as a result of that, sadly, they are the countries who have the money, but they are the countries who use the concept of the essential medicines list to the maximum. Whereas low and middle income countries who actually require it much more than this do not use it to the extent that high income countries use it. I hope that has answered your question.
Right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chris. It was a wonderful talk, and it brought back memories of the various talks I have listened to you giving over the years. And because we don't talk much about the social aspects of prescribing, or how to look for good information, or how to teach our students that we need to look for information, reliable information, and so on. So this, I'm sure that your talk would have touched some nerve for the people who are prescribing irrationally, and hopefully that they will start thinking about it, because as you said, this is a personal journey, and to be able to write a good prescription, a rational prescription, is perhaps the most important competency we can teach our students, whether they are medical students, undergraduates or postgraduates. So thank you very much. And I'm just going on to the next item on the agenda, and that is I have this. I have to give you a citation, present a citation on behalf of our institution. Can you people see it? I'm standing up. Can you see it? Focus the light on it. Yeah. So this is the citation, and I'm going to read this.
Yes,
this will be mailed to you.
Okay.
This will be mailed to you in Geneva. So it says, AIMS Bhubaneswar takes the privilege of honoring you with Dr. J.K. Mohanty Memorial Oration Award 2020 in recognition of your seminal contributions to the field of clinical pharmacology and medicine. Your exemplary way of taking up challenges and going the extra mile for affordability and safer use of medicines indeed makes a huge difference to human society. We appreciate your commitment, your passion and unflustered diligence, your mettle and spirit, which makes you a role model for students of medicine and the community at large. We take pride in extending this commendation and honor to you for your phenomenal endeavors for the cause of medicine. We wish you greatness and glory in personal and professional life ahead. Thank you for your esteemed contributions. This is from our institution.
Thank you very much. And I do hope that once things return to normal, that I would be able to visit AIMS Bhubaneswar and spend some time there, because that would be wonderful to me, to remind
Most
me of
welcome,
my
sir.
India. And
Thank you.
so,
Thank you.
So we have one more thing on our agenda, and that is we now invite Dr. Deepika Mohanty. Ma'am, can you unmute yourself, ma'am? Dr. Deepika?
Yes, I did that.
Yes.
Okay. I have a very small thing to present to you, and this is good evening to all. Esteemed Director of All India Institute of Medical Science, Bhubaneswar, Dr. Gitanjali. Esteemed Dr. Krisanta Urisurya, the first Professor Dr. J.K. Mohanty Memorial Oration Speaker, valued friends and colleagues from the medical fraternity and dear friends from across the aisle. I speak here on behalf of my mother, my sisters and brothers, my father's extended family, his grandchildren and relatives, his myriad students and patients, and myself. I would like to begin with my deep sense of gratitude to Dr. Gitanjali for making this late Professor Dr. J.K. Mohanty Memorial Oration Lecture happen. She indeed has been the pivot and anchor for this reality today, and I just cannot thank her enough. To Dr. Krisanta Urisuriya, the oration speaker, not only for a scintillating exposition of the topic, but also for the choice of the subject matter, prescribing the ethical basis, lessons, and tools in the journey, which incidentally was something closest to our father's heart. Even today, I can hear my father's voice on medical ethics in my ears 26 years after passing. Fortunately, we have in our midst our mother, who from time to time dials back to her memory of some 70 to 80 years and often bursts out with her remembrances. It is mostly the ethical lessons of a doctor that our father verbalized and often shared with her. This ethical tinnitus running loud and deep in our ears. Her voice and her enunciation of ethical values have always remained a music to our hearts and mind. Of the many pathies that we come across in medical science, like neuropathy, enteropathy, etc., my father would often say empathy is the one which is most vital. It is an all-embracing pathy that encompasses everything and lies at the core of treatment protocol. The crucial connect between a doctor and the patient. I have not forgotten that. Now, kindly permit me to go personal. As the eldest in the family, I was fortunate in being with our father the longest. I was fortunate also for doing medicine and as the recipient of his unceasing homilies on Hippocratic oaths and the ethics of therapeutics and patient care. His focus was on serving the people, especially the poor and the indigent. And he named me not mere Deepika, but Deepika Desakallan. Although my middle name slipped off people's mind, many of his friends and contemporaries continued calling me by that name, Desakallan. He wanted me to render service in the humanity unstintingly and with intense compassion. How often did I see him staying back in the hospital all night when patients turned critical and needed constant watch. Exactly 26 years ago, since his passing on 5th December 1994, as director of the Institute of ICMR, I was organizing the International Conference of South Asian Society of Atherosclerosis and Thrombosis in Mumbai. I had rushed back home after his cremation. When we sat down to take stock, the family was in quandary. What am I to do? Do I stay back for the ritualistic 10th day of rites when this responsibility of the conference lay on my shoulders? We discussed at length and decided to act as our father would have liked, and if alive, what advice you would have professed in such situation. Work is worship. One of my siblings averred, he would have said, not the fulfillment of rituals. We followed our hearts stirring our father's inner imagined voice. I shall narrate another incident to relate to another facet of my father's personality. It was August 1942, The freedom fighters were lost in the Angul jail. Rattled by the Quit India movement, the British authorities had beaten them up black and blue. A hue and cry had ensued. The popular pressure forced the government to ask the jail doctor to examine the prisoners. My father was the jail doctor. He examined the internees and submitted his report. The report created a furor when it reached the government. Quickly, a contingency plan was worked out. The Director of Health Services, one Dr. Chopra, a lackey of British imperialism, swung into action and descended on Angul unannounced. "How are you, Doc?" Chopra asked, his voice dipped in sugar and honey. He went on to extol the good work the young doctor had done. "I have been asked to furnish a report on your excellent work," he showed. "The government's thinking of sending you to UK for higher studies." Nonplussed at the encomiums soared, my father wondered if the gushing praise was not the prelude to something sinister. After an hour of inanities, Chopra braced up for the real thing. Yes, I have a small matter to tell you. These blighters, these so-called freedom fighters, have been given a royal hiding. I would request you to give your report accordingly." Father said that he has already sent the report to Dr. Chopra. Chopra pretended innocence and advised to modify the report and push the issue under the carpet. Father protested that the freedom fighters have been badly beaten up. "Then change your report. The governor desires that." "I can't." Father was polite but firm. "That is against my professional ethics." "My dear," Chopra began, his voice was on edge, "don't be a slave to your ethics. Make ethics your own slave so that it does your bidding." Again, Father asserted that he cannot change the report. "Are you a doctor or a politician?" Chopra asked. My father's replied, "A candle doesn't light only one side." The reply infuriated Chopra. Further, his voice now menacing, "I order you to change your report." Father was firm, "I shall not." "I am ordering you to." Chopra stamped his shoes in rage. "Do you know who you are talking to?" "I know I am talking to the Director of Health Services, Odisha." My father replied and asked scornfully, "But do you know who you are also talking to?" Next morning, a special messenger handed him his transfer order to a remote place in Koraput district, Odisha's Timbuktu. He moved over without any fuss. Now, this is one aspect of Dr. J.K. Mohanty I just tell. May I end by thanking once more Dr. Krisanta Urisurya for gracing the occasion and delivering the oration address, and also Dr. Gitanjali. Now, I present Dr. Urisurya the scroll virtually. I will be sending, but I'm just showing now virtually. And
Thank you, ma'am. It's a beautiful silver plate which is engraved. Thank you, ma'am.
My is also joining us here, sitting on the back.
Okay. Ma'am, have you completed, ma'am?
Yes, please.
Okay, then can I request Dr. Biswamohan Padi to give the concluding remarks and vote of thanks? Dr. Mohan Padi, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Respected Dr. Veerasurya, respected Dr. Mohanty, Dr. Muthuswamy, Gitanjali ma'am, Dr. Hota, dear colleagues and students from various institutes all across the country. It is indeed my privilege to propose the vote of thanks on this august occasion. On the behalf of Department of Pharmacology and my AIMS Bhubaneswar family, I express my sincere gratitude to Dr. Veerasurya for joining us from all the way from Geneva and sharing his invaluable ideas and resources for improving and promoting rational prescribing. Sir, your presentation has aptly conveyed to us that improvement in prescribing should be a personal commitment rather than a system-driven compulsion. I also profoundly thank Dr. Deepika Mohanty for entrusting the organization of the Professor J.K. Mohanty Memorial Oration to the Department of Pharmacology. And I thank Gitanjali ma'am, Dr. Hota, Dr. Maiti, the IT department for facilitating this virtual meeting. Lastly, I thank my colleagues, residents, and all the more than 100 people who had joined this virtual meeting this evening. It's been a great pleasure being with you. Thank you all once again.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bishamani.
Thank you. Thank you. So, ma'am, I see Dr. Vasanta Muthuswamy. Ma'am, do you want to say something?
Thank you, Dr. Gitanjali.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. I would like to thank Dr. Deepika Mohanty for giving me this opportunity to join the first J.K. Mohanty oration today. And I think you would not have found a better person to give the first oration than Dr. Chris Veerasurya. And his talk, everybody, more than 100 people heard today, is a very apt topic, very well suiting the whole life's goal and motto of Dr. J.K. Mohanty, your dear father. I think you chose the best speaker. I think forever in the memory of whenever we have the J.K. Mohanty Memorial Oration in future, we'll always be reminded of Dr. Chris's talk, which has come out, which is very clearly matching with the whole idea of Dr. Mohanty, his life's ambition and what he has taught to all of you. And from what we heard from you many times, Dr. Mohanty has told us about her father and his commitment. I knew about it. It's wonderful to listen today to her recitation of his life's, what he did in his lifetime, and the matching oration by Dr. Chris. And thank you all so much for that and for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you, ma'am. So with this, we will close. Chris, thank you very much. From AIMS Bhubaneswar, thank you very much.